The transition from egalitarian ancient societies to patriarchal agrarian systems transformed women into the physical embodiments of family honor, a shift so entrenched that the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan reported at least 405 honor killings in the year 2024 alone. That staggering statistic forces a re-examination of how human civilization constructs the concepts of modesty, shame, and female subjugation. We are unpacking a thought-provoking Urdu essay titled Tashkhis, or Diagnosis, by writer Mustafa Sajjad Haider. The text challenges the innate association of women with obscenity and dishonor, arguing that this burden is an unnatural, manufactured historical tragedy rather than a biological or divine mandate. Haider posits that modern patriarchal violence and the obsessive policing of female bodies are symptoms of a profound historical shift in human economic and social structures.
Haider frames his argument by juxtaposing the reverence of the female form in classical art against the intense regulation of women in conservative societies. He points out a glaring paradox in human behavior. On one hand, global culture celebrates masterpieces like the Mona Lisa or the Venus de Milo as pinnacles of human creativity. On the other hand, the living, breathing woman is burdened with the immense weight of maintaining societal purity. Haider traces this back to a fundamental shift in human history. He argues that the concept of female immodesty is a tool of control, born when human societies transitioned from reverence for female fertility to the absolute dominance of the male bloodline. It is a compelling thesis because it strips away the religious or moral justifications often used to defend patriarchal control, exposing the raw economic machinery underneath.
That economic machinery is the crux of the issue. To understand how a woman's autonomy became synonymous with societal shame, we have to examine the Neolithic Revolution. Before the advent of agriculture, hunter-gatherer societies operated on a more egalitarian baseline. Anthropological evidence suggests many of these early groups were matrilineal. Descent and kinship were traced through the mother. The logic is straightforward. Maternity is visible and undeniable, whereas paternity, prior to modern science, was impossible to prove. Women were revered as the sole bringers of life, often elevated to the status of fertility goddesses. Haider touches upon this era in his essay, noting that women held an elevated, almost divine status because the biological mechanics of reproduction were shrouded in mystery.
The transition occurs when human beings figure out how to cultivate crops and domesticate animals. Agriculture created something the human race had never dealt with before: surplus wealth. When people settle in one place and accumulate resources, they develop the concept of private property. Historian Gerda Lerner details this process in her foundational book, The Creation of Patriarchy. Lerner argues that the commodification of women was the first accumulation of private property. Men who accumulated wealth through farming and animal husbandry wanted to pass that wealth down to their own biological children. To guarantee paternity and ensure the inheritance went to the correct bloodline, men had to establish absolute control over female reproduction. The female body transitioned from a revered source of life to a locked vessel for inheritance.
I want to challenge the romanticized view of this pre-agrarian past. Haider's essay suggests a period where women ruled as supreme matriarchs and men were subservient. The anthropological consensus does not support a mirrored matriarchy, where women oppressed men in the way patriarchy has oppressed women. The evidence points to egalitarianism, where tasks were segregated by sex but valued in equal measure. The danger in framing the past as a female-dominated utopia is that it sets up the patriarchal shift as a justified rebellion or a natural pendulum swing. The reality is far more utilitarian. The shift was driven by land, cattle, and the physical force required to defend static resources. As tribes clashed over agricultural land, the physical strength of men became the primary defense mechanism of the community, elevating their social status.
That distinction is vital. It was not a violent overthrow of matriarchal queens, but a gradual structural reordering of society around property and warfare. As male dominance institutionalized over millennia, the control of women required an ideological framework. You cannot police half the population through sheer physical force at all times. You need a psychological mechanism. This is where the concepts of honor and shame enter the human narrative. If a woman's reproductive capacity is the key to a man's legacy, any unauthorized use of that capacity destroys the man's social standing. Sociologist Fatima Mernissi articulated this phenomenon, noting that the concepts of honor and virginity locate the prestige of a man between the legs of a woman. A woman's mere existence becomes a constant looming threat to her family's reputation.
This ideological framework manifests in horrific historical practices. Haider's essay highlights the pre-Islamic Arabian practice of female infanticide, known as wad. In the era often referred to as Jahiliyyah, or the Age of Ignorance, newborn girls were buried alive. The justifications varied from the economic fear of poverty to the social fear of future disgrace. What strikes me is the perverse logic of the practice. Burying a child alive was viewed by some tribes as a humane method of execution because it did not involve the spilling of blood. It was a preemptive strike against hypothetical shame. A daughter could grow up, engage in premarital relations, or be captured by an enemy tribe, thereby sullying the family name. The anxiety surrounding female potential was so overwhelming that men chose to annihilate the female before she could even form a thought.
The psychological terror of that system is profound. Even though the advent of Islam prohibited the practice of wad, pointing to Quranic verses that condemn the killing of infants, the underlying anxiety about female shame survived and adapted. The physical erasure of the female infant morphed into the psychological and social erasure of the adult woman. The concept of seter, which translates to veiling or concealment, became paramount. It is not just about physical clothing, it is about the complete exclusion of women from the public sphere. If a woman cannot be seen, she cannot invite the male gaze, and therefore she cannot bring dishonor. Haider notes in his essay that this intense policing assumes women are the innate source of obscenity, while ignoring the male gaze that projects that obscenity onto them.
We see the legacy of this exact mindset in modern South Asia, which brings us back to the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan data. Over 405 honor killings documented in 2024. In Pakistan, the practice is locally known as karo kari, meaning black male and black female, referring to individuals accused of illicit relations. The essay author provides chilling anecdotes, mentioning a case in Lahore where a man murdered his sister for the simple act of looking out a window to see what a dog was barking at. Her curiosity was interpreted as a breach of modesty, a threat to the family's garat, or traditional honor. These are not isolated incidents of individual rage. They're executions sanctioned by a parallel quasi-judicial system of tribal councils, like jirgas or panchayats, which prioritize the restoration of male prestige over human life.
The mechanics of karo kari reveal the economic undertones that still exist. While the stated motive is always the restoration of family honor, investigations often uncover ulterior motives related to inheritance, land disputes, or the desire to escape debt. By labeling a woman Kari, a man can murder her and then demand compensation from the man he accuses of being her Karo counterpart. It is the ultimate commodification. A woman's life is extinguished to settle a financial score, disguised as a moral crusade. Human rights advocates consistently point out that the official numbers represent a fraction of the reality. Many of these murders are staged to look like suicides or accidents, buried deep within rural communities where state law has little reach.
It raises a significant question about the efficacy of legal reform. Pakistan passed comprehensive legislation in 2016 designed to close loopholes that allowed perpetrators of honor killings to walk free. Prior to that law, the family of the victim could legally forgive the murderer. Since the murderer was almost always a brother, father, or husband, the family would just forgive their own relative, rendering the justice system impotent. The 2016 law mandated life imprisonment even if the family pardoned the killer. Yet, the statistics from 2024 prove the violence persists. It seems legislative action is incapable of dismantling a belief system that has been hardwired into a culture for thousands of years. When the entire social fabric views a woman as a vessel for collective dignity, the threat of prison is a weak deterrent against the terror of social ostracization.
The law is a necessary framework, but it cannot penetrate the domestic sphere where these cultural norms are reinforced on a daily basis. Haider's essay touches on the chronic anxiety fathers and brothers feel upon the birth of a daughter. He describes men in high social standing who view the birth of a girl as a lifelong mission of concealment. The psychological development of a child raised in that environment is stunted. Her entire existence is defined by restrictions. She learns that her body is a hazard, her voice is a liability, and her autonomy is an insult to the men around her. Haider proposes a straightforward, albeit radical, remedy. Society must stop differentiating between men and women in matters of moral policing. If a wrong is committed, it should be judged on merit, not on the gender of the accused.
Haider highlights a profound hypocrisy in the outrage expressed by certain cultural commentators. He notes that individuals who claim to be rational or progressive often revert to the most primitive tribal defense mechanisms the moment a woman's autonomy is discussed. They panic at the accusation of endorsing immodesty. This panic reveals how successful the agrarian patriarchal project was. It convinced human beings that the subjugation of half the species is a natural moral imperative. If we accept Lermer's historical breakdown, then patriarchy is not an eternal human condition. It is a specific historical invention, created to solve a specific economic problem regarding property inheritance. And because it was created by human beings, it can be dismantled by human beings.
Dismantling it requires confronting the uncomfortable truth that women sometimes participate in upholding these systems. Older women in the family, mothers and mothers-in-law, often enforce the strict codes of modesty upon younger women. This is a survival strategy. In a system where a woman's only path to security and status is through her adherence to patriarchal norms, she will police other women to protect her own standing. The tragedy is cyclical. The essay ends on a poignant note, quoting a poet to express the sorrow of a life spent under constant, suffocating surveillance, where the prime years of youth are lost to the endless task of guarding one's own honor for the sake of someone else's ego.
The diagnostic conclusion of Haider's essay is that treating women as equals is the only cure for this societal sickness. It is not an invitation to obscenity. It is a return to a fundamental human baseline where a person's worth is not tied to an archaic system of property and prestige. If this conversation gave you a new perspective on the history of gender and society, send the episode link to a friend who appreciates deep historical dives.